Hi, everyone. Welcome. I guess we'll get started. My name is Sandra Frank, and I am an associate professor of history and women's and gender studies here at Roosevelt. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to welcome members and supporters of the Working Women's History Project. Roosevelt University and the Working Women's History Project has a long collaborative history. According to my colleague, Professor Margaret Runn, who's studying me back there, the WWHP started to hold their annual gala here in the 1990s, perhaps even as early as the 1980s. As a historian, I realized I should know this, and so I will try and find some documentation. I do know, though, that our current university historian, Lynn Weiner, and the late Professor Elizabeth Betty Balinoff were instrumental in building this connection. They shared with the WWHP a commitment to preserving the history of women and the labor movement. And this is perhaps epitomized in Dr. Balinoff's Labor or History Project, which was actually conducted in conjunction with the WWHP. And so they shared a dedication to fighting for social justice through education and access. Therefore, it is with true gratitude that we once again welcome the Working Women's History Project to Roosevelt University after a too long break. I hope it's the start of a new partnership to carry on the mission and the tradition of civil rights and social responsibility that both Roosevelt and the Working Women's History Project champion. And I'm really honored to be a part of it. So thank you for being here. I just want to bring up and introduce the Dean of our College of Humanities, Education, and Social Science, Dr. Gina Cola, who's just going to say a couple words about Roosevelt's.
Thank you so much, Professor Frank. Welcome to all of you. It is so delightful to have you here. I saw some of you enjoying a little bit the work here in the Gage Gallery, which I encourage you to explore after the panel concludes this evening. It's a wonderful exhibit and a demonstration of the kind of work that we support here at Roosevelt, as is your own gathering here tonight. So I wanted to call attention to the fact that this is actually 2025, this is the 80th anniversary of Roosevelt University as an institution here in Chicago. We're going to be celebrating all the way through the fall, including with our American Dream Reconsidered conference, which will take place in the fall, in which Professor Margaret Brown is a co-chair for. So please stay tuned for those kinds of events. And we also have coming up on April 24th, a night at the Auditorium Theater to celebrate Roosevelt and its 80th anniversary. Tickets are still available for that, and they start, I think, at like $49. There's going to be Parvesh China, who is an alum of Roosevelt, is going to be the MC for that evening, and Courtney Reed, who is an alum of Roosevelt from our College of Performing Arts and was the original Jasmine on Broadway, is going to be here performing, so it should be a really fun and enjoyable celebration. So if you're available and interested, please join us for that as well. And now back to Sandra.
Honestly, I'm only back here to introduce Amy Lakin, who, with Sue Strauss, are really responsible for putting this event together. So,
Okay, thanks so much. As Sandra said, my name is Amy Lakin. I'm president of Working Women's History Project. We're a nonprofit that began in 1996. Our mission is to research, preserve, and promote the stories of historical urban Chicago women who made or are currently making contributions to achieving justice and inequality in labor, women's all rights. We do that by holding events like this, and also by presenting short plays about Xóchitl written by local playwrights interviewing the award members. We also publish a newsletter periodically with their opinions, but we hopefully start that soon, and we have it. Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
little better. You got it a little close.
Oh, okay. So loud to make the face came.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, you recently relaunched a new website. We had a very dynamic young woman doing it for us, and she did a great job. You can learn more by clicking on www.hbchicago.org. Maybe because people put a lot of work into putting this program together, and I'd like to thank Roosevelt University and Professor Solomon Faith for her help and generosity, and interviewers and interviewees who were so gracious to share their stories. I'd also like to thank the board members that working with this history project for their help on this event. Sue Strauss, hold very closer in the room. Lastly, thanks to our moderator and panelists who are certain to inspire a lively discussion. I'm also going to turn things over to Joan Morris, one of our board members who would like to spend their objective currently to put together excerpts for interviews. I'd also like to say a word about what comes after people uploading the comments that are accepted. I'd like to introduce the moderator, Shia Kapos, who is a national politics supporter to Politico, and the author of Illinois Playbook newsletter covers government and politics in the state with even more in the program here. And he is also a frequent contributor to Chicago Tonight. So with that, I'll turn this over to Joe Morris.
For everybody, yeah.
Turn the mic on.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Hi, good evening, everybody. As Amy said, working on the history project and Roosevelt University, we're extremely honored to present personal stories of many different immigrants. And first, I want to introduce Bridget, who was one of our own, who was an Irish immigrant.
Soon after I turned 10 years old, my parents, who had been in this country before, said we were trying to come to America. And my parents have been here, but because of the Depression, they went back to Ireland. So I had these visions of all this light, and especially chocolates. They said there were a lot of chocolates in America, which of course had great appeal for me. So our papers finally came through, and in those days, you had to have a sponsor, you had to have a job to come over here. So right after my 11th birthday, we were supposed to get on this wonderful ship, but we got on a ship called the Marine Falcon, which was not a very classy ship. But I'll tell you one thing about it. It's the same ship that brought the Jews over in the 40s. You know, on America finally let them in, but we had an easier jump getting in. But I remember it was January when we came over, so the water was jumping 20, 30 feet. And I just remember a lot of grown-ups throwing up and a lot of kids playing. And it was a long, long voyage. We were on the sea over 10 days, you know, in those days. And we finally arrived in New York. I couldn't get over the electric lights and everything because we had no such thing in Ireland. We just had a little farm, no sign of electricity or running water or any of those luxuries. So we wound up coming to Chicago because that's my mother's brother had a job lined up for my dad. And then I just have to say this, Irishmen in those days, the oldest one in the family got whatever the parents had, and the others were on their own. So they got married sort of late. And in those days, my father got married at 52, which in those days was old. So when I was 10, he was, you can figure that out. So school was a study for me because you're the last one to arrive. You're sitting at the back of the classroom, and whenever they called me to read, all the kids would turn around and giggle because of my accent. So I learned not to read very much. So I was a very fine reader in Ireland, but I wound up getting a failing notice in reading because I was terrified of getting up and being laughed at. You know, because I was not pronounced and everything the way the American boys and girls did it, you know. So, and I was bilingual, but being bilingual in Irish wasn't a great help in those days, you know. But we survived. But a year to the day after we came to America, my mother died. And I was the oldest of 4 girls, and it's part of the reason we came to America, because my father was a farmer, and girls weren't exactly what he was looking for. So people were so good to us, and I think I learned to trust people very much. They helped us, and I think I went into education because of that. I just wanted to be of some help to children. I taught in the Chicago Public Schools for 35 years. I think I've had my 2 minutes, right, Jackie? Okay. Who's next?
John again. Should. Here you are. Yeah.
Hello.
Thank you, Wilson.
Thank you for that. I am lucky enough to have been teaching and tutoring at Oakland for a number of years now. And I got to know a young woman and tutor her for over 6 years. We became really close friends. And she has shared her story with me. Her name is Sarah. My name is Sarah. I am 27, and I am from Baghdad, Iraq. My family and I fled as refugees in 2010 due to the war. It was an extremely dangerous time. I was 11, and I was kidnapped and held for ransom. My parents paid the kidnappers to get me back. So like many other immigrants, we just left with the clothes on our backs. We first immigrated to Syria, then to Turkey, and then we finally arrived in the United States in 2013. We eventually settled in Chicago, seeking a safe home and better life. When we first came to Chicago, we got help through the World Refugee Organization. Adjusting to life in the U.S. was challenging, and one of the biggest obstacles I faced was the language barrier. I didn't speak English when we first arrived in the U.S. The refugee organization provided crucial support.
Yes.
Right? So my face there. They provided crucial support, finding housing, assisted my father in securing a job, and enrolled my siblings and me in school. Making friends and adjusting to school was no easy task. When I was a student at Sullivan High School in Chicago, some students made fun of me because I wore a hijab. They assumed I didn't have hair since it was invisible. Back in 2013, there weren't many Muslims at the school. So many students didn't understand that wearing a hijab was part of my religion. My advice to new immigrants coming to Chicago is don't be afraid of anything. Don't hesitate to ask questions, because asking is the best way to learn. Also try to find housing near the city center, so the essential places like stores and schools and public transportation are accessible. I got my associate's degree at Oakland, and I am currently married and live in Skokie with my husband, son, and new baby girl. Skokie offers an urban suburban mix with many restaurants, parks, and our community is very diverse, and the public schools are very high rated. I know it's not easy in the beginning, but in a few months, you will look back and you will say, we did it, just like my family and I did.
Hi, I'm Bob.
I was asked to read this description of the situation in Venezuela by Freddie Asa. Is he here? Cool. This is Jackie Curley's transcription and reduction of this 37-minute audio recording. I want to share with you the economic situation in Venezuela when I left in 2016. Back then, I had an industrial clothing factory called Xóchitl, producing clothes for Puma. When President Chavez died, corruption was already there, but ordinary people could still buy food. But once the president died, corruption became much more acute. The dollar shot up and currency began to devalue dramatically, reaching hyperinflation. Maduro government invaded businesses, food packaging companies, everything related to business, to sell the product below the cost of production. For example, if a loaf of bread cost $1, they forced it to sell at 20 cents, 25 cents, or 50 cents. So businesses began to go bankrupt, including mine. I then opened a workshop making clothing, but the government caused a customs intervention, so nothing came through customs. In my case, fabrics, threads, and everything for clothing production stopped. For a while, things improved, but then there was another customs intervention by the government, and they shut me down as a workshop. The government got involved through a group called the CLAC, C-L-A-C, with food distribution. They give a bag of food monthly. They got into establishments, supermarkets, and force you to sell below the cost of production. If you don't, you get enormous fines, which also lead companies to bankruptcy. And so things began to worsen in Venezuela. Shortages began to appear. At this point, I was left trying to survive selling coffee, selling cakes on the street. I don't criticize the street vendors. We were left hypocrites. One of the things that the government did was that it also took away our food. It took food off the streets, and the food packaging companies are no longer working at 100%, but rather at a small fraction, which the government took over with everything. They started selling yuca in the streets, then potatoes. There were times people ate only yuca during the week or only potatoes. People started going through garbage. You started to see emaciated, desperate people, very skinny children crying from hunger. The government then took away cash. Banks could give only 30,000 bolivars at a time, and that was only enough to buy what we called Politico, a small glass of coffee. And then inflation caused those prices and others to go up and up. Since I was selling coffee, I had to buy it from farmers who would only accept cash. So for 1 kilo of coffee, I had to carry a large sack of cash. I received the coffee as only as whole beans and then ground it with a small manual mill, which was very difficult. Then cash itself was being sold and sold at 20%. The very evil government hired thugs with guns and gave them salaries and fully furnished apartments. Their job was to make sure there were no marches, no protests, no concentration of people. Any type of concentration of people, birthday or wedding, the thugs would come, and if you did not disperse, you were shot. That's it, straight. What?
That's a shredded.
This is a story of a 26-year-old young man, Venezuela.
Oh, you're no.
I am originally from Venezuela, from the state of Miranda. In Miranda, there are many celebrities and very happy and cheerful people. What made me leave criminal gangs and police corruption? It is something that cannot be experienced in any country. Before arriving in Chicago, I was in Texas for 15 days, and from there, brother helped me get to Chicago by plane. I arrived with the help of my brother and his partner. I went to a shelter at first. Migrants and recent immigrants helped me to receive aid to be able to earn a living for my family. In all the world, there are good people and bad people. As long as you know how to be a good human being, you don't care about the rest.
Hi everyone, my name is Lynn and I've been asked to read the part of a Venezuelan woman in her 20s. I'm originally from Venezuela. I was born there in the capital. I have 2 children. The girl is Venezuelan. What made me leave is the corruption and how bad the economy is in our country. I came to Chicago crossing 5 countries, which was very hard. I also went through the jungle in Darien. It took months before I could enter Chicago on a bus. Initially, I stayed in a shelter. Then, Catholic Charities helped us find a place to live. Organizations like theirs is what helped us. My only problem now is the difficulty in working due to lack of childcare.
I'm Alma Washington, and I'm going to read how the Chicagoans express their frustration because the city has ignored the needs of its residents and instead given resources to recent immigrants. Now, for some factual background, the city said Monday that there were 11,253 migrants in 23 city and state-run shelters, and that it has received about 37,308 new arrivals since 2022, but Texas Governor Greg Abbott began sending people to cities across the country. That was March 18, 2024, by Daniela Silver, NBC News. Expression number 1. Some residents feel the city has been too accommodating. Leandro Michael Jones, 47, said he had watched with exasperation as the police station in his Old Town neighborhood turned into a place where migrants slept on cots indoors and outside in camping tents. These people are eating well. They have better homes than I do, better shoes, Mr. Jones said, sitting outside his apartment complex. Chicago officials, he said, are doing more to help migrants than they are people who have lived here in the city for years. Now, how are you going to take care of someone else when you're not even taking care of your own people? He said that on October 6, 2023 in writing. Expression 2. So, you guys have all this passion for new arrivals. What about the passion for the homeless vets that saved America? One woman said. That was at a hearing on Chicago's migrant crisis, September 22, 2023. Expression 3. But the Southside has been under-resourced, underfunded for years, for decades. We have schools that need to be reopened. We have businesses that are boarded up. Shouldn't the city be devoting resources to help Chicago's Southside? Expression 4, at a different community meeting. It seems only fair that for every migrant you find housing for, you find housing for one of our own homeless.
I'm Sally Rhodes, and this is a Venezuelan woman in her 20s. I come originally from Venezuela. It's a very beautiful and wealthy country, but because of the government, it's become a place where you can't live on little money that's the minimum wage. I left because the economic situation is unsustainable. To get to Chicago, I traveled through 7 countries, including making a trek through the jungle. We walked and went by bus until we reached the border with the United States. I turned myself in to the Border Patrol, and they allowed me entry into the United States. From Texas, I took a bus to Chicago, where I got help from Catholic Charities. In terms of problems with people here in Chicago, I've truly done very well. As in every country, there is a lot of xenophobia, and I've had to deal with some of those people.
Hi, I'm Joanne, and this is the last reading. It's Arcelia Romero's, apologize, my lack of a good accent. Her history of La Tiendita, a free store in Washington Park for all Chicagoans, founded by Arcelia Guerrero and Brenda Delgado. My involvement began when a colleague inquired if I could assist with lunch distribution in the 2nd and 3rd districts of Hyde Park. Given my employment at the University of Chicago, I could accommodate this during my lunch break. However, my participation quickly expanded beyond meal delivery to encompass the provision of essential supplies: clothing, sleeping accommodations, undergarments, bedding, inflatable mattresses, and temporary shelters such as tents. I reached out to my university colleagues regarding potential donations, which initiated a consistent flow of contributions. My vehicle became a mobile storage unit, perpetually filled with clothing, bedding, and various necessities for individuals seeking refuge at the district police station. Initial migrant assistance comprised multiple components: meal distribution, clothing provision, ensuring access to basic necessities. A significant impediment to our operations was the absence of adequate storage facilities for the continuous influx of daily donations. Initially, a colleague was housing all donations at her residence, which proved unsustainable. This situation prompted us to seek a dedicated space. We used 2 or 3 spaces, some complimentary, others requiring rent, which required a GoFundMe campaign. Through a fortuitous connection with a Covenant Church member, we secured space in their community center. While we have continued to pay rent to Covenant since April 2024, they have been exceptionally accommodating. The co-location with their food pantry alongside La Tiendita has enhanced our service capacity, leading to increased community awareness of both facilities and our Monday food distribution program. La Tiendita extends its services to the entire Washington Park community, attracting individuals from both Northside and Eastside residents, in addition to providing clothing, household items, and baby items, all free. We recently implemented a Know Your Rights educational session. The church hosts Angel of God, an organization that facilitates job training programs. Many of the volunteers who helped during the crucial times of 2022 to 2025, especially when families sought safety at police stations in 2022 and 2023, are still actively pursuing our mission. These committed individuals are still facilitating donations throughout the city and are essential conduits for directing funds from different neighborhoods to our organization. One can donate through the QR code at the main desk. Thank you all.
A lot of stories about, obviously, immigration, migration, and how it's affecting the city and the state and how everybody's dealing with it. So I was excited to be asked to be part of this. With me here, our panelists, our experts. Xóchitl Bada is a professor in the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She's written at length about immigration and has an expertise in migrant access to political and social rights. Right. Dixon Romeo is the executive director of Southside Together, which supports African American residents in underserved communities and helps people find housing and secure health care. So he's going to be able to talk to your the thing that you read. Very specifically, I think. I don't know if you heard that. And then Sendy Soto is the city of Chicago's first chief homelessness officer. She's been charged with coordinating city departments, sister agencies, to develop a 5-year plan to address homelessness in Chicago And if you've been following this issue, you know that she's been instrumental in helping kick off this new program that provides shelter, combined shelter for homeless people who have been in the city for a while and new arrivals. So we're excited, I think, to hear about how that program is working. To get everyone up to speed, if you listen closely to that letter that was read a few minutes ago, I might be repeating it a little bit. Illinois has seen about 52,000 new arrivals, mostly from Venezuela, come to Illinois since 2022. They were sent by bus. Most didn't know anything about Illinois or the weather, so it was a big surprise. They were sent by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, trying to make a point about the immigration problem in his state. No matter what you think of him, I would say he made his point well. We know it's a problem. Many, as you know, slept in police stations. Early on, the city had a hard time dealing with the influx. There were so many people. That's why Abbott sent them in buses the way he did, so Chicago would have a hard time dealing with it. No one thought we'd be getting 52,000 people all at once. You know, we're a sanctuary city. We welcome everybody, but no one expected that they would come all at once. So I think that is something that we can talk about today, too. Let's start with Sendy. I wonder if you can talk about the status of the shelter system and where we are with that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sendy Soto, the Chief Homelessness Officer for the City of Chicago. Before I get into the status, I do want to share a story that's very similar to Sarah. So I was born in Guatemala, and we came in the 80s during the Civil War in Guatemala. My family made the trip, and my family sought refuge and support from World Relief. So it's the same agency, I think, that Sarah visited. And so we received our green card during amnesty under President Ronald Reagan. A few years later, my first job in human rights work, around 2004, was at World Relief. And I had no idea that my parents received their green card there, or that I received the green card. I went to World Relief because I had this calling to support people from diverse backgrounds. You know, I grew up in Chicago. I came at the year of one. I went to public schools, grew up in Albany Park, in Logan Square, where it was very diverse. For me, I've always seen people from Cambodia, from Vietnam, especially when there were all of these other displacements happening across the globe. A few years later, I go to World Relief and I tell my parents, oh, I have this job and I'm going to become the citizenship program coordinator. And they told me this is where we became lawful. I ended up becoming a U.S. citizen through World Relief and brought my parents along during that time. So it was a full circle moment for me, but it kickstarted my advocacy for human rights and social justice. I went to Northeastern. I studied justice studies. I went to also Wright College, where I studied sociology. And so for me, this is a really important part of my entire career, my personal life, to be able to do this role for the city of Chicago, the city that raised me, and for a mayor that believes deeply in racial justice and social justice. And I've been in a few different government offices. I love them all dearly. I've never felt more like myself until now, being able to do what I do. So just big kudos to the mayor and the administration, and just really happy to be doing this on his behalf and on behalf of all of the Chicagoans and everybody who frequents our city. So I'm happy to report that, in the 52,000 people that came to this country, and even before then, there were people that were, of course, migrating to this country. It was just more so the people coming on buses and the planes and on their own from the southern border during that time. There's been a concerted effort through our county, state, and federal partners to ensure that people had a place to land that wasn't going to be complete displacement and disarray in the thousands of people that were coming to this city. I actually was a consultant with the state of Illinois when we first received the couple of buses. And at that point, actually, we took a chapter off of the refugee resettlement program at World Relief and other refugee resettlement organizations because the refugee resettlement program, which actually serves people every day now, right? Ukrainian, Afghanistan refugees, Eritrean, they receive, there's been many changes, but most recently they receive about a year's worth of services, and they get help with employment, with education, with housing, with cultural, integration. And we used a chapter from that model to support the residents that were coming to the state at that time, and of course, predominantly to the city of Chicago. There was not an intent to do it solely for this population in terms of the funding or the sources from the public sector, from the local side. There was truly an intent to do this work with funding from the federal government, because we thought they would address the increase of people who were seeking asylum as a refugee program and a refugee opportunity. Did not become the case. They made it to where we were responsible for many reasons, not to necessarily put fingers, but they made it where we would. Is that my? Okay. They made it where, and I'll be fast because I know that we don't have a lot of time, where we would be responsible for the cost. They were able to earmark, $1 million for this effort, but those earmarked dollars had to go through city government, city council. So of course we were the ones administering the funding, and then the city and the state, and the county at that point also provided support. Since the I would say maybe fall, summer of last year, but in earnest in the fall, we officially kicked off the One System initiative. We received recommendations from a set of community providers, people with lived experience, of what we can do to integrate the new arrival system that stood up during this crisis with the existing homelessness system. And since then, the One System initiative has increased our homeless system. We took the best practices and what we could protect in terms of funding and programs into the traditional homeless system. We opened the Shelter Placement and Resource Center, where anybody can go and wait for shelter. So if you're waiting for a shelter at a park, you can also just wait if there is room. I will say that because it's also kind of at capacity at times.
And this is for migrants and.
Yes, it's anybody. So now there is not a line item. There is not a subset of staff from the city that support just the new arrival mission. That no longer exists. Now that we have this unified system, and I have to say, for the first time in over a decade, the city does not have a waiting list for families seeking shelter. All of the families have been sheltered. Those who are waiting for shelter, those who are waiting at Salvation Army for shelter, everybody, because of this expanded system and the beds that we were able to bring into our system from the new arrival mission, we've been able to serve all families seeking shelter. So every child now has a comfortable bed, and for the time being, a permanent home until they find a permanent home elsewhere.
And maybe that's a good way to pivot. There are some people who are finding housing in other parts of the city, a lot of migrants, families living together. I did an interview where there were like 3 different migrant guys, different from all over Venezuela, didn't know each other. They're all living in a house together. On the South Side, you work on the South Side. Can you talk a little bit about how that is impacting the community now?
Yeah. So again, my name is Dixon, Romeo. I'm from South Shore. I live in South Shore. Executive director of Southside Together, which was formerly Stop and Not Be. These are 2 long-term groups doing work on the South Side that merged recently, which is really cool. And, overall, I think everybody in this room, I think we're all really clear around like the ways in which housing in Chicago has been a struggle historically, right? From redlining to, Chicago at one time being the public housing like capital of the country, and the decimation from that, right? Like all those things are connected to the way in which the city is segregated. What does it mean to live on certain parts of the city? Not just in terms of race, but also in terms of cost, right? The Black parts are cheaper, right? The Latinx parts are a little bit more expensive, and the white parts are a little, are more expensive.
And part of the reason there is extra housing on the South Side is because there's been an exodus of the Black population. So you have this empty housing that the city and state have taken advantage of to put migrants there.
Yeah, and I think I would say this. I think exodus apply.
Yeah.
From my perspective, right, I would say it's displacement, right? Like these are intentional policies that do drive folks out of neighborhoods, right? If you close 50 schools in Black neighborhoods, then you close public clinics, and then you don't address poverty, right, which results.
You don't have any grocery stores
grocery stores, right? Even if I wanted to stay, right, and I could afford to stay, right, like I don't really have much of a choice, right? On top of that, in neighborhoods like South Shore Woodlawn, where these neighborhoods are the eviction capitals of the city, right? South Shore in particular, for the past, I think, 14 or 12 years, in terms of eviction violence, right? It's the #1 neighborhood. So you have all these phenomena happening at the same time. And then, to your point, this is intentional part of, I think, Greg Abbott and other folks' plans. And then, so of course, what the city is doing, which, we were one of the few groups, especially early on, to be very vocal in support of, right, new arrivals getting support, right, because, part of our philosophy, we're a membership-based group, right, we're going knocking on people's doors, bringing people into the group, people make decisions, is that, we don't pick fights with folks who don't have power over the things we're dealing with, right? So, there was a narrative that, money for new arrivals was taking resources away from, Black or other immigrant communities, right? Like not just the Black community, right? But other, we saw in the 12th ward, right? Like actively, like folks, non-Black folks who were, at one point, someone in their family immigrated to the country, actively, like literally attacking an alderman about, right, whether or not there should be migrant housing in their ward. So I do push ours, especially it was not just like a Black versus brown thing. It's broader context of like how we view and talk about people migrating to the country. But I'll answer your question.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think a lot of it, and I'll get to you too, a lot of it is the Black residents I talked to, they don't want to be angry at migrants looking for housing. They're angry, I think, at city council for allowing it to happen. But they realize we are a welcoming city, but like, we don't want, there's this kind of back and forth about whether to accept that or not.
Yeah. And we've done a lot of work working with other Latinx groups, but also just internally with our members having a conversation, right, about, what is the reason why folks who live in Venezuela or Haiti choose or want to immigrate to the United States? Is that connected to the lack of federal funding in your HUD bill, right? Like, what are the priorities that are there? But also being really honest and challenging the city and our local officials on, I think one thing that is true that folks highlight is that in the new arrival crisis, we actually found that city council and the city very quickly, right, when needed can move a lot of money regardless of the risk. And that same energy was not, someone argues the same energy wasn't put towards other places. And that's not.
Well, sort of. They're still debating about the budget now. So I don't know. They're still running out of money.
Yeah, but I think broadly, I think the point that I would want to plan is, our thing and a lot of our members think was that, Venezuelans or Haitians, right, who are coming off a bus from Texas in shorts and it's 30 degrees outside, they do not have control over whether the city council spends money, right? Like that actually lies at the feet of, the mayor, other elected officials. And so, it caused, I think, a stir, and it brought, I think, up tensions around, like, what does it mean for our city to be welcoming to everybody, right? What are the ways in which the city has failed to support long-term residents who are Black, but also new arrivals, right?
Yeah.
In those stages. And I know Sendy's doing great work. And I think that, we saw through the cycles before we got to the Warm System Initiative, and even though there may be critiques of it, like, what does it mean for us to be, against ICE, against, welcoming folks, but then being somewhat okay with you being in a shelter or homeless, right? Like there is a tension that exists with that as well. So these are just some of the conversations we have and pushing folks, actually bringing new folks into the groups so we're actually united, invited together to address this long-term solution first.
And maybe, Xóchitl, you can talk a little bit about, has this happened before? Are you seeing that? I mean, what is your take on it?
There's definitely brings lots of memories that I have lived on.
So you want to hear it?
Yeah. So this morning I was really preparing a long talk about this, but still this is mostly like a conversation. I just want to bring a few highlights of the past history. And I was trying to bring together the early 20th century at the moment in which Mexican immigrants and Blacks were living together in Chicago's Southside.
So this is a very important moment in which these two groups were pitted against each other purposefully by the employers, who first brought Mexicans as the strikebreakers to the steel mills, and also later employers were bringing blacks to the packing factories in back of the yards to also as strikebreakers. And how it was very difficult for those two groups to come together and to share the same neighborhood, and how they were always sent to the worst parts of the neighborhoods and derelict neighborhoods in the dilapidated housings, and how difficult it was to find rents. And let's also bring together the idea that for these Mexicans who were fleeing in the Mexico's revolution in the year of 1910, was very gruesome. There were more than 1 million deaths in that revolution, and they found some of them settlement in Chicago. That coincided pretty much at the same time where many of the Black Americans were moving from the old Confederacy in the South to the United, to the
migration up
to
north.
the Great Migration, the Great Migration to the north, to the west, and to the Midwest. So those who settled over 6 decades in Chicago's Southside, they were settling simultaneously with the Mexicans. And at least I really want to read a very nice quote that I found in Black Metropolis, a book that was published in the year of 1945. And let me find it here because it's super important for the current moment that we are living today. It says, Black Chicagoans working in meatpacking were well aware that both Mexicans and blacks were discriminated against. To illustrate this point, there is an excellent quote from the book Black Metropolis, published in 1945, that cites the views of a black worker in a packing plant, and I quote, "Mexicans and Negroes don't get breaks like whites get. I haven't seen any Mexicans or Negroes on cranes or in the electrical department. We have one Negro craneman now in plate mill yards. He's been there since 1919. You know why? He stayed in during the strike." End of quote. In fact, Mexican immigrants were used on purpose as a wage among low-wage workers. In the steel mills, the function of Mexican labor in 1919 was to serve as replacement workers instead of other immigrant groups or African Americans, precisely to avoid having to hire blacks in any significant numbers, and some feared would provoke racial unrest similar to that of the summer riots of the same year. When Mexicans came to South Chicago, many had no idea they had been hired as replacement workers. Others suspected they were working as strikebreakers, but took the jobs in the steel mills in search of social mobility. The road to achieve social mobility in South Chicago was full of challenges. And let's remember that conflict and competition are two conditions that historically the United States, that immigrants that come to the United States have had to face prior to finding accommodation and adaptation. So those 4 steps that were very clearly observed by Robert Park in Chicago School of Sociology early in the 20th century, we continue seeing those. He observed those with Polish, with Irish, with the Slovaks, with Germans and others who first came to the city, in how they were trying to find their footing as integrated, as we heard earlier from the narratives of the Irish today, this afternoon. And this is something that still gives me hope, that is provided that these communities can understand that the fight is for low-wage workers, like employers are trying to pit them against each other, I always see a path forward because historically this has been the case for the city of Chicago. Let's also remember that in the 1930s, the Great Depression did not look like Los Angeles or New York for immigrants in this city. And here I'm not only talking about Mexicans, but all the immigrants that were living in the 1930s here. There was not a draconian institutional racism against immigrants that were implemented in the city, and many were spared from repatriations only because Mayor Cermak decided not to share the relief lists with the INS because he was an immigrant himself. So for him was very important not to share those relief lists. So you see in the history of the city, there has been this race of hope. The same during Operation Wetback in the 1950s. There were only no more than 1,000 immigrants, mostly from Mexico, who were deported during Operation Wetback in 1954. So this city has been very resilient in tolerating and accommodating. And yes, I do understand there is conflict now, but hopefully with good policy decisions, such as those who were implemented by Mayor Cermak, maybe like the city can find a path forward.
But now the challenge is we have a president who wants to,
Sorry.
sorry, did you have a question? No.
No.
Oh, okay, yeah. Now we have a president who wants to eliminate sanctuary city status. What will that mean for Chicago? I mean, we will ignore it. Pritzker says, I think we will ignore it. I don't know.
Sanctuary City helps us with the financing and programs and services, but it doesn't take away our humanity. And I think that's really important to note that the city is always going to be an immigrant-friendly city. It will always have, for the time being at least, administration that cares deeply about the diversity of the city, of not only international migration, but domestic migration. And so we are going to continue, and as the mayor noted in his speech to members of Congress last month, continue to fight for what's right. We won't be deterred. We can only take the fight of sanctuary cities as far as we can legally. So it's yet to be seen what will continue to be asked of us. Certainly there are a lot of attempts, as you noted, I think the funding threats and there have been some funding pullbacks on new arrival mission dollars that we haven't received as a city that, might be at risk and we might not receive as a city. So there are a lot of different threats that we're having to navigate. But again, I don't think that this is going to take away our humanity. And actually, just on a personal note, what I tell people, if anything, this is a call to action for all the change makers. This is our moment, right? It's not the other side's moment. And so the mayor is steadfast about making sure that we address not only the issues of the immigrant community, but all Chicagoans, and ensure that we continue to talk truth to power about systemic and structural racism that has impacted communities of color, predominantly Black families. So that is continuing to be at the forefront of the administration. And what happens in terms of the sanctuary city component on the federal end, I'm not, that is yet to be seen. But in terms of what we do on behalf of the city of Chicago, we continue to care for people for who they are.
Very good. I am fascinated by, unlike in history, when you were talking in the 1900s where, Blacks and Latinos were being pitted against each other. I know that there is that tension now, but I think it's fascinating that you have Venezuelans now living in Black Chicago, and it's kind of transforming that community. Do you get a sense of that? Do you think like what is it going to be like in 5 years? Will it be a little bit different? The Southside?
Oh no, I don't think so. I mean, I think one thing I would name is I think regardless of race or whatever language you speak, I think any people that are living in an area that's deprived of certain things, the same kind of conditions come up, right? And I think for me, we do a lot of tenant organizing, right? Working with tenants who live with slumlords or in areas where they're being displaced and gentrified. And, you you knock on the doors, you're used to seeing, long-term Black residents. And then as, time has gone on, we're knocking on the doors and there's more, Haitians and Venezuelans. We're like, oh, okay, well, I don't speak, but the conditions are the same, right? We actually there's a couple pieces in Injustice Watch about it. A particular set of buildings owned by Ariel Lowenstein, the 312 Tennessee, where we organized, where we actually had, new arrivals and long-term Black residents in the building. And, you have some folks paying market rent out of their pocket, and then new arrivals were getting money from the state going to the same landlord, right? And so in that scenario, what we actually see is like the same people who were profiting off of like gentrification in the Black neighborhood are the same people who are profiting off of this new arrival crisis, right? And then there's no housing, there's like no material gain in terms of like addressing problems for either community long term, right? So I actually think we have opportunity long term to really come together, like as we're speaking, right, around the central things that all our communities are facing, right? The reason there are not new arrivals in Black neighborhoods is because it's relatively cheaper.
Right.
And because of that, people can use that to incentivize or de-incentivize behavior that drives up that price. And that's something that we, are continuing to organize to make sure the city and the state do. So honestly, when you look at places not like Chicago, if you look at like Houston or like LA or New York, where there's racial segregation in every city.
Everywhere.
Yeah, but it's less, stratified in Chicago, right? You could say 39th Street, you could say 87th Street, you could say State.
Well, all the freeways or the expressways were built to divide communities.
Exactly.
It's very,
Exactly.
It was strategic.
So yeah, I bring that up though to say that I think in 5 or 10 years with this influx of folks, like these neighborhoods might look a little more like, poor neighborhoods look in LA or New York or Houston, but the problems still persist, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of where folks are coming from.
I'm a political reporter, so of course I want to hear what you all think will happen, how this will impact the mayor's race in 2 years. What do you think about that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'd love to hear what people think about that. I clearly am a big fan.
You're a big fan. I do, I know the mayor takes a lot of hits, but, people need to drive on the South Side. They need to see why he wants to invigorate. There are areas that are blighted, and they should not be. And so if people, I think, really were there and could see, they would understand why it's so important to the mayor. I don't know how to get people there. I don't know.
I'd say it's up south and west side. I think.
And west side, yes.
Yeah, I think for me, I've known the mayor when I worked in UWF and even before that when I was doing community organizing on the west side. I think that, I have a lot of critiques, a ton of critiques.
And you don't have to talk about the mayor. I'm talking about the mayor's race.
Sorry. Let me rephrase.
Okay.
Let me, I'll land the plane.
Yeah.
I think all that being said, I think I align deeply with what Sendy is saying is I do think that the mayor has been consistent publicly on the fact that not backing down on that this needs to be a welcoming city for folks. And I think that will play a part in the mayor's race. I ultimately think that the question all of us are going to have to ask ourselves right before we go vote is what direction do we want to see the city go? Do we feel problems are getting addressed at the root level, or are we okay with certain issues persisting? And the question is going to be who do we believe can deliver on shifting these issues, right?
So you think the migrant issue will play a role in the mayor's race, even though it's 2 years away?
1,000%. Yeah.
Because I do feel like everything's calming down. People are finding housing. They seem to be getting their footing. Am I being naive? I don't know. Is it still a struggle?
Well, certainly housing is always going to be a struggle, and it's not just a city issue, it's a global issue. Housing and homelessness is, both of those issues are the same in any place in the world, right? It's probably not accessible to everybody. Landlords that are not properly renting out to their tenants are probably not being punished, or there aren't enough punitive measures to ensure that doesn't happen, especially for those who are low income. And so the city can look to solve homelessness and housing as much as it can, but the issues that arise are far beyond city limits. Last year, the Supreme Court passed the Grants Pass case out of Oregon that prevents people from sleeping in public spaces. And in cases where municipalities want to arrest the homeless population, they can. And in parts of the state of Illinois, some municipalities have gone that route. So that might drive people to come to a welcoming city, in a more general term, like Chicago. And so I think what we are trying to do is ensure, and the mayor is very clear about his key priorities, which is youth employment, community safety, public health, which are the community health clinics that have opened up in the last year, homelessness and housing, and certainly ensuring that the infrastructure and projects are not being faced with a lot of bureaucracy like cut the tape. This year, for the 2025 budget, this is more on the general homeless program side, that now is everybody, right? Anybody that falls within the programs that serve people who are chronically homeless or within the homeless system, despite their immigration status, it oftentimes it's in relation to how long they've been homeless in the federal definition. But nonetheless, this year, the mayor's office, we were able to contribute $24 million, which is a $22 million increase to rapid rehousing, which is what we are seeing for the families, for the individuals at Gompers Park and other parts of the city. That is an incredible investment, mainly because the dollars that we were receiving from the federal side will be dwindling down. The accelerated moving events, which have garnered a lot of interest, started during the pandemic, and we've been able to really be successful. That even the Office of Inspector General wrote really positive reviews, and I think for some agencies that's really striking because oftentimes it's more negative than positive. And so we don't want to see this go. We want to see it flourish, despite the federal funding being gone. But that gives us a chance to give people that housing first opportunity. If they're within, the homeless system. So if they interact with our continuum of care, if they're working with Chicago. And a lot of these programs also, we need to have good coordination, partnership with the city to ensure that, people that are on the ground, frontline workers are hearing through the city, vice versa, so that we're working, hand in hand. So one way that we're doing that is we're getting ready to do some community engagement about the 5-year plan to address homelessness. There is a 30-person strategic advisory committee. It's focused on diversity of race, people's abilities, gender, anything all of the diverse, wonderful opportunities that we want to make sure we have voices at the table on, and a focus on youth homelessness and family homelessness as well, because those experiences could be different. Youth homelessness is very different from a family who's homeless trying to work the system. But the 5-year plan hopefully will be released in the summer. It will go to the public to get public comment. But our hope is that people will answer 5 questions in our public survey. It'll be a QR code. It will be on billboards. If somebody that your neighbor, your friend, your loved one, if they frequent Chicago, live in Chicago, we would love to hear their feedback, because one important component is, do people know what the homeless system even is like? We don't know. So we want to find that out. We want to find out whether people understand how homelessness shows up. We have the shelter system, but there are people living doubled up. There are people that have temporary accommodations, couch surfing. And so CPS counts homelessness different than our COC, perhaps, than our city colleges. I believe their homelessness rate is about 1,800 students. So we want to make sure that Chicagoans know not only what they see in the news and what they read, but that they understand that it can be any one of us. Any one of our loved ones could be experiencing precarious housing. And we want to make sure that we can come together, our frontline workers, people who live with experience, the city agencies, and others, so that we can embrace this issue, because it's an issue that impacts all of us and impacts us, some of us more than others, because of structural harms that have been done to those communities.
So I will say that yes, definitely it's going to impact the next mayoral race, the situation of the new arrivals. And the way in which this is going to impact is in how the process of integration is going to be drastically interrupted, regardless of what the mayor does. Because it's going to be very difficult to complete the integration through the paper. through offering papers to all those Venezuelans and Ecuadorians that arrived. And you can see that still the city has many people in the streets that are still begging and selling candy everywhere, not only downtown, but in the north side. And I don't know if that population has already been offered some sort of shelter, but the reality is that they are still waiting for the temporary protective status. And this temporary protective status is no longer going to be possible for all those immigrants. So we are in a very, very precarious situation in how migrants are going to be able to fare in the current climate. And so I will not be surprised that in the lack of enforcement for how these housing programs are administered, we will see lots of abuse from landlords because of the national rhetoric that these immigrants, we are trying to make their lives miserable. Let's not forget that the way in which Operation Wetback was successful in the 1954 was not by deporting people, was through the so-called voluntary deportations. They are trying to make people live on their own accord, but with Venezuelans, that's impossible. And the vast majority of those 52,000 that the city of Chicago arrived are actually Venezuelans. And Ecuadorians, and especially indigenous Ecuadorians, are a close second, but still we do not know what type of services can be sped up for giving all this status, the temporary protective status or papers to all those who have been waiting. So I see that the situation is not not particularly hopeful for the next mayoral race, like of thinking that, immigration is not going to play a role. It will definitely play a central role.
I know talking about that to voluntarily go back to your country, Venezuelans cannot really do that. There is not an embassy here, so you can't go to get your papers to go back to your country. To do that, they are trapped here. It must be very, very frustrating and scary. I don't know. Let's take some questions. Or any takeaways? Questions?
I guess my question is that basically what Trump seems to be doing is just withholding massive amounts of money from anyone he deems not going along with his plans. And that threat has caused most entities to kind of fold because they won't survive without money. So my question is, if Chicago doesn't get any federal money, what happens to the city?
Well, there are, maybe you can say that, but there are threats, and there are executive orders saying this, but they're all being challenged in the courts.
Forget the courts. Just forget them.
Well, the courts are what is going to prevent a lot of this stuff from happening. I don't know.
No, it isn't, but okay.
I'm going to say something very controversial.
Oh, should I turn my tape recorder over?
I mean, this is where we need dedicated revenue for homelessness services, another version of Bring Chicago Home. I mean, we don't have any dedicated dollars that go straight to the homeless sector. We have to try to ensure that we can pull money from the corporate dollars, but if we're completely reliant on all these other sources, we end up running a risk to ensure that we're continuing to expand our services rather than what folks are probably trying to figure out now is just how do we stay afloat versus rolling, right? But we need more dedicated revenue and revenue that will hit the most impacted populations in a positive way, so that we're not solely reliant on sources that are not within our control. So I'm not saying that we're going to do another, so please don't quote me on your Politico report tomorrow. But I'm just saying, if we had to Bring Chicago Home, we could have relied on over $100 million to go towards homelessness and housing.
Yeah, I thought until you began to make your remarks, Xóchitl, that there was a huge elephant on the coffee table here that Joanne evoked, which is the prospect of mass deportations. And I don't know if any of you has any actual reliable information about how many people from Chicago have so far been deported. If you look at Block Club Chicago, they say that ICE is withholding this information.
Yes, nobody knows exactly.
So actually, it may be underway to a greater degree than we realize, But Trump has promised up to 20 million deportations. Of course, that's a fantasy figure, but we are talking not just about self-deportation, but about forced deportation of very large numbers of people, which could completely transform the problems you're talking about. Instead of accommodating people coming here, it's protecting people from being driven out and even sold into imprisonment in El Salvador.
Well, let me tell you something that for everybody here to, let me remind you that between 1940s and 1960s, the U.S. was able to expel 6 million. Not by deportation, but many of them by voluntary departure. And this is a period of 22 years. In the Placero program in the 1960s, mid-1960s. So it's very impossible that the United States government has the capacity to conduct this massive deportation. What we are seeing is a difference in the methods in which they are carrying out these deportations. They are now using military planes, they are using lots of theatrics, lots of like trying to show us Dr. Phil, and like putting the Guantanamo, like fitting Guantanamo again, like when they received during Clinton administration, or the Haitians. But this is not even true, because that now everybody who has been sent to Guantanamo has been shipped back, because Guantanamo was not ready, will never be ready. Whenever reporters go there, they have only been able to photograph like 10 cuts, only that in Guantanamo. So it's, as you can see, it's a lot of theatrics to scare people out and do what they did in 1954 during Eisenhower, to make people like drive them out of fear, and so they can like live on their own accord. In the city of Chicago, the most chilling effect that I've seen thus far is the Kristi Noem, like dressed up in the like Rambo gear on CBS News. At night, every day at around 9:30, she shows up for 1 minute, thanking President Trump of all his service and warning in perfect English to all immigrants that this is their opportunity to leave, and doing lots of deceptive information tactics that hopefully somebody has already submitted like correction or some sort of court challenge to that. She's saying that if immigrants leave now, they will be allowed to return to the American dream. I even invite you to watch these commercials, because they are every day. Yeah. I thought they were paying them once a week or something, but now I've been very paying attention every night, and they are every night. So she speaks for a minute in English, and she says, please leave now, because don't get like, you need to be certain we are going to find you and we are going to deport you. So please leave now. This is very similar to what happened in the 1950s, those type of campaigns that were done in Chicago and elsewhere, telling people we are going to deport you, we are going to go home, we are going to go.
Which is why Tom Homan is frustrated, though, because in Chicago, the immigrant community has done such a good job of informing people about their rights and informing people when you open the door, and they have to have the right documentation. That he hasn't, the sweep that they promised hasn't happened to the extent, as far as we know.
But it's been on to opposite.
That's true. That's true. There's a question back here. Hi.
Hi. I would like to, I think this goes to the city of Chicago. I have heard there's talk or movement about a Chicago initiative to build low housing in the north, not the north side. I was hoping it would be the north side, like scattered housing, but this is the west and the south side. Low housing, I think it's called Shia, Chicago Housing Initiative. Can you speak on that, or do you know anything about that? It's a big movement, and I could give you more information offline, but I just wanted to know if you had any updates, or you know.
No, I just know that the mayor is very supportive of building that kind of housing for people. And I feel like it's like the near west side, like closer to downtown, that they're doing that, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, there is a program that is led by some of the agencies, community partners in the city, to build affordable homeownership So it's home ownership housing. I think that's what you might be referring to. And it is in predominantly underserved areas, and making them affordable to those who can buy home ownership, buy a home, and also build generational wealth, if they so choose to do that, right? Not everybody wants to buy a home. They might just want a steady, place that they can rent and save money that way. But if they so choose to buy a home in an area that's been underserved, so there was a recent article about it. In terms of low-income housing, in the official sense, the Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund has a program that supports landlords that want to be part of the program. And then we have LIHTC, Low-Income Housing Tax Credits, that the Department of Housing manages, and it's rental housing. And people who want to get tax credits through LIHTC are able to bid on proposals or be able to submit their proposals to the city every 2 years. And that housing is dependent on where they have the locations, and the locations that are most underserved at times get the most points. And that's how, it kind of comes together of where affordable housing through LIHTC is built. There is a whole racial equity impact assessment that I was part of with the former commissioner of the Department of Housing, where we looked at LIHTC and where LIHTC units and buildings are located across the city, and how, to be honest with you, the city was perpetuating racism or not perpetuating racism and undoing some of those systemic harms. It turned out that a lot of the LIHTC units over the course of 20 years that we researched were in areas that were predominantly Black, continuing to build that narrative that Black communities are low income, when really that's where those buildings were at. So we reversed course, and a lot of other things have happened because of that study. But that LIHTC is for rental units, and you're talking about home ownership, and then there are a lot of other programs that exist that can support landlords who want to rent affordably.
How do the people that are
Romeo, just a,
You were talking about Shia. So Shia is Chicago Has Initiative, and that's a coalition of community groups that are, I think, pushing for some of the things that you're talking about, some of which the city is starting to work on, some of which they aren't. So I just wanted to, if you're talking about Shia, it's a coalition of different groups versus, I think, a specific city program.
I think these people make sure that on the front line, because I know that a lot of initiatives are in and out, and a lot of money gets pushed in, but then its outcome isn't what we planned, and this company should be the people that get the money through these grants and stuff accountable to complete their mission and vision. How do you order people get involved? So begin to hold our elected officials accountable. But these big 20 commissioners are spending on good causes, and I want them to be successful without no how things happen.
Yeah, I can connect you to folks at Shia if you want. So me and you can chat after this. I don't know if any of you live in the neighborhood. Probably not.
I will add that the city's involvement, in some of that program is Cut the Tape, which is trying to cut through the long wait to get the dollars and program out to the community. And so it doesn't have to go through so many hurdles. And so we've been working with the Shia group and others on just what we can do to expedite the development of housing, so that we're not, kind of creating a bottleneck of potential housing that can go to people that need it most.
I wanted to actually address a question to Arcelia Guerrero, who is one of the co-founders of La Tiendita, which Joanne read about, and to some extent to Freddie, if we get back to him. And the question is, we're talking, I personally, even though I've been in that La Tiendita and other places, I really don't have a very good sense of where the Venezuelans are now.
they're all over the Southside, and they're very quiet because everybody's very afraid. Like I would say 2 months ago, I was getting calls like, Shia, you got to go to the South Side. It's so different. You see Venezuelans everywhere. There's a chicken coop on the corner. There's this over here. Well, then Donald Trump was elected, and then the threats came, and then everybody kind of went into hiding.
Well, Arcelia is sort of at the center of much of this.
Hello, everyone. My name is Arcelia Guerrero.
I am a co-founder of La Tiendita and the Southside. It's actually in Washington Park, along with my friend Brenda Delgado. So we do serve a lot of Americans in the Washington community, but also migrants. We've been at Kapos Church for maybe a year, over a year. We actually have a space in their community center where we have a free store. So it's a free store in combination with a food pantry. And we've noticed over the few months since we've been there, we've been known to have a free store on 41st and King Drive, also at Garfield and King Drive. It's a space that the University of Chicago gave us. So migrants were coming often to our store, free store, to get clothing, any necessities that are needed. They were coming from the north side, they were coming from downtown, they're coming from South Shore. And so we still have that communication with migrants, and they still come to our store, and now they come to get food from the food pantry. So from what we know, the stats that we have everybody sign in, and there are a lot of migrants that are living right on Michigan Avenue. So Kapos is located at 56th and Michigan, and so that's what we see. We see a lot of Venezuelans that come to our store, they come to the food pantry, and numbers are going up. From what I understand from other food pantries, it's very scarce around the city. People are not going to the food pantries because of...
A lot of people are going to parishes, like they're going to a lot of black churches on the South Side. I had interviewed one Alderman Hall, his parish. You know, they were seeing people come in for help early on. They found housing. It's like doubling up, tripling up in houses. They got some help initially, and then they kind of disappeared, you know, because of, I think, the fear of just being out on the street a lot. Though I say that, and you still can see new arrivals in places where they're looking for jobs at a lot of the big box stores where you can kind of gather and maybe construction people come by and hire you up. That has problems too because they sometimes get ripped off by people. They don't get paid the way they should, so it's a constant struggle. Yes, hi. Oh, just a second. Hey, we got a question right here.
Hi, my name's Ayla. I work for the Spectrum Charter Schools, and I just wanted to ask what challenges have been seen. Obviously, the reality of places that is for underfunded communities. We already have our black schools that don't have the resources that we require to be successful. What does that look like for migrant families and students who
might not even speak English? Like, what efforts are we seeing there? What challenges are we seeing?
I don't know what you're seeing. You go ahead. Yeah.
So I think we do a lot of work at Hyde Park Academy and Parkside and other schools in Woodlawn and South Shore, and I think it's exactly what you described. Like, because the resources aren't there for long-term residents, when new arrivals arrive at schools, it's also not there. In addition to like the language gap, I actually find that like young people are a lot less. There's a lot less tension than with adults. You know, they're just kind of like, oh, that's cool. You're not from here. That's what's up. Anyway, we about to go play basketball, so here you go. But I do think like one thing to your point that's connected to it, which is like this question of resources. Like we know with CPS there are concerns that in the future there are going to be continuous cuts. That affects charters obviously, and then so yeah, it doesn't look good. I don't know. Sorry.
Well, the first side, let me tell you that in the 1990s, like there were millions and millions of Mexicans who arrived not just to Chicago, but they were pushed west, like Aurora, Carpentersville, Waukegan, like North Chicago, etc. And they were successfully integrated. At the very beginning, there was a huge challenge because the public schools were not prepared to include a bilingual education. There were very few teachers that were capable of including these two languages. But little by little, they were able to get incorporated in the districts, were able to hire teachers. There was a big influx in the 90s from teachers from Spain who were teaching in Cicero, for example, that are still teaching everywhere in the West Side. And there are also lots of influxes from teachers from Puerto Rico and even from Mexico. They were brought on special visas as an emergency to be able to educate those kids that were children of immigrants in the 1990s at the peak. That ends from Mexico's migration. If you were not aware, 2005 was the last year in which Mexicans come to this country in large numbers. It has been like downward ever since. This is never going to be shown to you in Fox News or any of those places because this country wants to believe that it's an invasion or things like that, which is not the case. Now this is more like Central America, now Venezuela after the pandemic, that you see all these shifts. But this country has been very resilient in integrating people from Ireland, from Germany, from Bohemia, Slovenia, all countries that have historically come to this country. I just do not think that education may be a problem. I see labor being the problem. All these abuses, and also housing and labor. I will say that those are the two biggest challenges because this situation of being afraid is automatically creating two classes of workers, those who have papers and those who do not have papers, and now are dangling a threat of deportation, and this is going to create lots of abuses for paying them less than minimum wage. So the city needs to really put its act together in terms of enforcement to make sure that like employers are paying minimum wage regardless of status, because all workers have rights, they have same rights. Under the law, there are very few distinctions between workers with documents and workers without documents in the labor laws in this country. And this is my main concern, that this is going to be a boon for those entrepreneurs and capitalists and owners of the means of production to really take advantage of this precarious workforce that is very afraid of going out and looking for a job because of what they are hearing in the news as this situation of trying to deport them.
Let's end on a more positive note, though. To Romeo's point, I think young people are so much more open about new people, and you have, these Venezuelan young people going into, predominantly African American schools where children haven't traveled, and so they get to meet these new people, and there's becoming this new community that wasn't there before, and you just have to wonder what it'll be like, in 2 or 3 years, that presuming that everybody can live cohesively together. So I'm having positive energy. Thank you so much for coming. I don't know if you guys want to wrap up.
I just want to thank you so much.